Welcome, everybody, to our webinar about communicating value at the edge. My name is James Christopherson. I'm an account director here at Sterling Communications. And our guest today is Tom Williams, Vice President of Worldwide Sales and Marketing at Veea. He is a seasoned international sales executive with a proven track record of driving strategic revenue growth and organizational success. In total, Tom has over 25 years of experience in sales and business development and has previously held senior roles at AT&T, Wireless, Boingo Wireless, and Smith Micro Software. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks for having me. It's gonna be a fun conversation today.
Yes. So today we're talking about the role of communications in a complex industry, such as edge computing. So I wanted to give you an opportunity before we start to kind of give us an overview of Veea and
Sure.
the industry that you guys play in.
Yeah, Via might not be a household name for everyone, so appreciate the opportunity here. We provide an edge platform or an edge gateway solution, and to Via, the edge is where people, things, and places are connected. This could be a home, it could be your office, it could be this hotel I'm sitting in, it could be a farm field or a warehouse. We've partnered with different industry leaders that really help refine our solution. Partners such as Tritium, which is a division of Honeywell, Cable Labs, Qualcomm, and all of these partnerships really help add value for our partners and our channel partners and their customers. We're a bit of a Swiss Army knife, right? We've got as you've learned, quite a diversity and variety of solutions that are supported by the Via Edge platform. These deployments can be a farm field here in Indiana, it could be a remote village in Indonesia, or it could be a warehouse in Mexico. Our headquarters is in New York City. We've got an engineering office and a living lab across the river in New Jersey, and another engineering office in the UK.
Nice. So as we dive into our agenda here, so I wanted to kind of pick your brain about how do you think about communications in a complex industry like edge computing that is, to your point, when you guys are a bit of a Swiss Army knife company and you play in multiple verticals, there's a lot of jargon, there's a
Sure.
lot of kind of highly technical, uh, language that is used on a daily
Yeah.
basis. Can you talk about like how as a marketing leader you kind of strike the balance between effectively communicating to your various audiences, what it is you do without kind of spilling over into overly technical kind of jargon, oriented language?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. As I articulated, we've got the Swiss Army knife approach almost, and in the technology industry, we'll just leave it very broadly there. It's cluttered with jargon and acronyms and buzzwords. And essentially, we try to keep things simple, right? As I said before, to us, the edge is where people, things, and places can connect. That edge can be defined differently for different scenarios. A home, it could be connecting smart devices or security or entertainment. Your office can be workplace automation, heating, building controls, access controls. A farm is just environmental or energy sensors. Industrial sites like a warehouse, it's asset tracking and energy controls. But for Via, we're trying to be consistent and use jargon-free real-world examples and try to keep things simple. Trying to talk to our partners and our customers at the level that they're at. They don't go through their daily life talking through our jargon on our examples and our acronyms, but by keeping a simple approach, it helps connect familiar concepts to our powerful edge capabilities and cuts through the noise of buzzwords and technical speak. It's really about keeping it simple and trying to keep it simple in terms knowing that many of our customers come from different backgrounds within the technology sector, if you will. And many of our partners and customers, English might not be the second, much less third language. So trying to keep things simple is very helpful for us from a communication perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've gotten to meet a number of your customers, and you have customers all over the world. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious, how do you how do you go about building trust with each of these different audiences in different parts of the globe, doing different kinds of things, right? Different kinds of use cases. How do you assure potential customers that Veea is, the best available product for them and can be trusted?
Yeah, it's great questions. And I think at its core, as again, you've learned over time, you and Sterling, because we do so much, there's not a single direct competitor for what we do. We're not in a retail game where we're Coke versus Pepsi or Bud versus Miller. So we try to break this down into a few simple things, right? First off is problem validation, making sure that we have a clear understanding of our customer or our systems integrator channel partners' pain points, and then support that pain point with data to validate that the problem is real and significant, right? Just because there's a use case or an opportunity, we need to understand that it's proven, that there's a solution for it, and data helps drive that. So once we've got data to support and prove the use case, then we move into, really market credibility and referencing frameworks or methodologies that we've adopted and implemented for like or similar deployments. So now we've established some credibility because we've done this before. And then from there, it's extracting more metrics and results of these pilot programmings or these beta testings, right? So providing results for what we've collected from an in-building deployment in an office environment, from a consumption of Wi-Fi or IoT devices that are connected, demonstrating value in the data that we've collected from sensors that are deployed across agriculture environments in soil or energy management. So now we've got metrics and results, which then helps, excuse me, helps us communicate our experience and our expertise, right? So being able to say, we understand your problem, we can solve that problem, and here's how we've solved it in the past, not just with what our technology can do, but what our technology has done. So now we've got the experience, we've got the data to support this, and then it's at that point, you're really in a bilateral commitment, right? Our customer wants to start being our channel partner, or the problems that they've communicated we can solve for. So then we've taken this experience, and then it's really simple channel partner onboarding, right? So it's a clear onboarding process and procedure, enrollment for our partners to understand how to use our technology, how to deploy, how we provide support and documentation in that relationship. And then in some cases, it might be exploring different risk-sharing pricing models. We live in a world where it's not just CapEx and OpEx anymore. There could be vendor financing options. There could be CapEx rolled into OpEx to help ease the sale, or more importantly, match how our partners are selling products and services. So we're then supporting that customer, and then it gets into educating the market. Then we start stepping into, we've deployed a farm field, we've deployed 3, we've deployed X. And that allows us to get into some more thought leadership and education. So whether it's webinars like this, whether it's getting in front of panel discussions, thought leadership positions at conferences or events, it really just builds over time. And as we horizontally grow with use cases and partners, and then vertically grow within each, it helps us build our credibility, build our experience, build our thought leadership.
Yeah, that's a great point. So something you just mentioned, kind of in the first part of your answer there, talking about understanding each customer's unique pain point, right? Like
Yeah.
that is a lesson that's obviously incredibly valuable, and it matters no matter what stage of the journey your company is in, right? You guys are a public company, which we'll get into that in a little bit
Yep.
here, but understanding your customers' pain points is mission critical, obviously. And even if
Sure.
you're a brand new startup that doesn't yet have a product, right? Understanding who your eventual customers, um, what their pain points are and what problems they need solved, that matters absolutely. And from there, it's kind of how you build what you communicate and signal to the rest of the market, right? So.
Yeah, it's all about understanding what markets we want to approach, what channel partners, because we do a lot of work through the channel versus directly, understanding how they can best serve that segment of the market, and then add value to what they're trying to achieve, right? So it's not just we can solve X, it's here's how we solve it, here's how we work with the channel partner, but more importantly, how we can work together to not be empathetic, but understand what the pain points and the problems are, and solving problems versus having technology in search of problems, right? So it's
Yeah.
really understanding what our partners are looking to do, how we can help work with them. Because at the end of the day, it's about solving problems, helping them grow their customer base, increase revenue, and for their customers, either more likely saving money and increasing operational efficiencies and adding value to what they do.
Yep. And then you mentioned as well, once you kind of get your customers to a place where they are willing to kind of advocate for you and advocate for your solution, can you talk about how you and Via think about leveraging those partners to kind of up level your marketing efforts through use cases and case studies?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. First off, value in our ecosystem isn't really communicated, it's demonstrated, right? As we talked a little bit about, it's tangible results, it's measurable impact. And so scaling up those channel partners is really starting with that source of truth, that data, and building upon it. As an example, that farmer who's got LoRa-based sensors in his farm field, his value is measured by time saved and not being able to or having to drive around his fields. Most farmers don't have concurrent, contiguous fields. They're scattered, they're quilt work. And being able to then collect data from sensors on an application. That value is going to be measured differently than, say, that warehouse in Mexico that's increased operational efficiencies and supply chain management through asset tracking solutions that are enabled through Via Hubs. So that dollar for dollar savings is going to look a little bit different, but they're both use case data that has been delivered through the transformative capabilities of what Via can bring to the table. And then that data is then easily used in those metrics or those items that I've talked before about putting together informed use cases, and not use cases about the technology, but use cases and white papers about what we've done and why and what that value is, which then can lead into, like I was talking before, thought leadership opportunities, presentations, and other content that gets out into the public domain, whether it's at a conference or a webinar that again relies upon not what we can do, but what we've done and what that value that's been derived. And then this is a Me Too world, right? So if channel partner X plays in a particular space and channel partner Y is tangentially related to that and is of interest, it just helps build credibility, not just credibility in what we've done, but credibility across, different ecosystems potentially.
Yep. Yep. That makes sense. And building credibility with journalists and maybe industry analysts is also a slightly different challenge, right? But I think
Mhm.
you kind of solve it. I think we have worked to solve it together kind of in a similar way, right? Where we are leveraging those case studies and those kind of proof of concepts with your various partners to show them, again, to demonstrate to them instead of telling them exactly the value that Via provides, right? So, for a journalist, right, they get pitched on different, technologies every day, right? And our technology promises to do this, promises to do that, right? And we can pitch those stories till we're blue in the face, but it's when you have a compelling case study, right? A compelling, third party validation, right? That shows the journalist, hey, this is real, right? There's something there. That makes all the difference, right? And
Yeah.
so it's the same challenge for a different audience that you can kind of tackle in the same way. Right?
Yeah, it's really the testimonial, I think is what you're looking for, right? The
Yep.
testimonial from where the solution has been deployed, whether it's that farmer here in Indiana, as a farmer with similar use cases, but a couple of different ones in Missouri. It's that testimonial for what value we've added to their life, whether it's again time saved and not having to go measure, plot by plot of land to look at moisture capabilities
Mhm.
to efficiencies in energy savings from HVAC systems that are used for air quality in chicken coops, for example. It's all about being able to build that testimonial based upon data. And that's where I think the journalist or the public takes a look at it, right? Everybody is familiar with slideware. LinkedIn is full of capabilities, but it's really the what we've done and how we've done it. And here are the results that really matter to get into those narratives and those stories.
Yep. Yep. Makes sense. Um, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity. Are there any other best practices that you've kind of learned in your time at Via, or just in your career as a marketing leader, just to help drive market awareness more broadly, right? Like, how do you I guess how do you kind of break into these new verticals, right? That
Yeah.
maybe Via doesn't already have a presence in.
We've touched on a little bit in terms of, the plan and, I feel like I'm harping on data, but, numbers don't lie, right? But I think in messaging strategy and getting into different verticals, it's one, obviously understanding the problem statements and the needs. But then it's really developing a clear, validated narrative that's supported and understood. Clear messaging, clear communication, and that might resonate from what our end customer channel looks like to their end consumers, to more importantly, internally, and making sure that everybody understands, why we're going after a particular vertical or why a particular channel partner makes sense. So it's clear communication, and then it's that consistent messaging, right? Outwardly and inwardly as to the value proposition, the benefit, the goals, and why we're doing said deployment or why we're doing said channel partnership and what the value will bring to the organization.
Yep. Yep. Makes sense. So as I mentioned earlier, Via recently became a public company, right?
We
So
did.
I'm curious to understand kind of how do you think about communications differently now as a public company versus, a few months ago when you guys were private? Is it the same kind of challenge and, considerations that you need to think about on a daily basis, or how does that shift kind of influence what you guys do on a day to day?
Obviously going public is certainly helping us be able to expand working capital to expand and grow these channel partnerships and these particular deployments. As far as the communication, public versus private, obviously, there's much more attention to what's said or what's printed or published. But I think if we get back to, the basic fundamentals of being, having a certain set of core values, communicating, benefits, communicating real-time, real-world results makes sense. Obviously, public companies have a little bit more exposure. And as a public company, a person employed, items might be said or might be construed a little bit differently based upon the ear that's hearing it. Whereas when you're private, that isn't quite as pronounced, but it's still there, of course. So I don't think the messaging really changes if you're sticking to your core values, communicating, benefits, communicating capabilities, all supported by, data from deployments and what you've done and not what you can do or what you would like to do.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think from my perspective, the one kind of noticeable change that I've seen just in what we're doing is you have to have evidence and support the claims that you're making now, right?
Sure.
As a public company because of that added scrutiny, right? So if we're going to say that, hey, we're going to deploy in this, market, right, in the next 6 months, we better do it, right? Or we
Sure.
better have, compelling language about, you know, why we may not make that deadline, right? We have to, explain everything very, very clearly because of that added layer of scrutiny, right? So it kind of actually it forces us to be I guess more buttoned up as communicators, right? And
Not
uh,
necessarily straight-laced per se, but
right, right,
effective and I think to your point, on point, on
yes,
message, right? Yeah.
yeah. Um, we have a question from the audience, and by the way, I should have mentioned at the beginning, if you have questions, audience, feel free to drop them in the Q&A here in the chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. But the first question that has popped in, Tom, is what's the most difficult communications challenge you've ever faced?
At home or in the professional environment? No, it's a great question, right? I think there's many components to this. I think the most complex challenge, at least from a VIA perspective, is going back to what I said earlier. English isn't necessarily the first language in some of our deployments or some of our engagements. So I think some of the challenges or a challenge would be keeping things simple and effective and communicating what we're going to do and why, having supporting documentation, and being clear and concise and on point, as I said earlier, with what we're doing and why, or how our solution works, or how to be onboarded. I think that's really a challenge that we may face day in and day out. On any given day, we could be helping We could be helping a tribal leader or a village leader, I should say, in Indonesia, bring connectivity to their village. We could be talking to a warehouse manager in Mexico. We could be talking to a farmer here in the United States. Three different languages, three different hours of the day, three different implementations of our solution, but all coming out of the Veea Edge platform and the use cases we enabled. So our communication, needs to be consistent, needs to be concise, and it can be challenging because, in some ways we go from one call to the next, which is the nature of, I think, business today anyway. And we just need to, keep things simple, on message, and concise.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. I would just add that, and this isn't necessarily unique to Via. This is kind of true with a number of kind of B2B kind of infrastructure, back end technology related companies. But and we touched on it at the beginning, but it can be challenging to fight back against the jargon, right, and the buzzwords
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
so much of how technical people communicate about technical things just
Yeah.
naturally lends itself to jargon, right? And so very few of a company's audiences, and there's multiple audiences you're speaking to at any given time, right? Very few of those audiences care to get into the technical specifications of how something works, right? They want to know, does it solve my problem? Does it make my life easier, right? You do have to have, obviously technical chops and technical messaging to speak to those product leaders. But again, like, does the market at large care about that stuff? Not, maybe not, right? And so you have to make
Yeah.
sure you're concise and clear, like you just mentioned, right? For those
Well,
audiences.
as I said before, our customers, or maybe the end users of our solution, of our customers, they don't go talking in acronyms and buzzwords and technology catchphrases, especially about the edge. You and I don't go through our day talking about electricity and how
Right.
it works and what happens. We just know that when we turn on a light or when we go to charge our phone, it works. We don't care about all the other stuff because we just want that functionality to work. Similarly, the end customers and where we deploy our solution, they just need things to work. They just want the value that we've told them will happen to occur, whether it's generate more revenue, save money, increase operational efficiencies. They just expect that to happen because of what we've communicated. So it's what we go through on a day in and day out basis. And you're right, there's just a lot out there that can be confusing for those of us on this side of the fence and trying to understand acronyms and phrases and what's happening.
Yep. Yep. 100%. We have another question from the audience. Tom, is there a particular story or analogy that you think really captures what VIA does, or what edge computing, the magic of edge computing really does?
Wow. Couple of thoughts there. I think a story about what VIA does, I'd look no further than what we've been able to do with some of these remote deployments in digital inclusion or connecting the unconnected. There's a couple of smaller scale deployments in Mexico. There's one in Indonesia. And what we're doing in those instances is bringing connectivity to an area, a geographic area that might not have the same kind of connectivity that you or I experience on a day in and day out basis. And sure, people want to connect their device, but if you take a look at when there's connectivity, it provides a lot more educational and economic opportunity. So in the Indonesian example, it's bringing connectivity to schooling. So, children in those environments, they don't have access to Google Documents and online learning, but at least bringing connectivity can help them start. Similarly, it can provide economic advantages for intervillage trading or the ability to market goods from one place to the next. One of the very first deployments we had was in a neighborhood outside of Panama City, Panama. And in talking to some of the residents who had connectivity, this one mother, the message that her response still resonates with those of us at Via today. It wasn't necessarily that now she's got better internet connectivity to have Netflix or to have connectivity in general. It was so that her children can have, Khan dashboards for math and for schooling, and being able to help them have an advantage or bring them on par with some other children around the world who have access to this day in and day out, whether they want to use it or not. So I think, that sort of story and the good that we're providing and the value that people perceive in having connectivity is really heartwarming for us, and it really drives our mission in trying to provide that connectivity.
Yep. That's great. Um, here's another audience question. How different is the value proposition now from when you joined the company a few years ago? And how different do you think it will be 5 years from now?
So from where it was a couple of years back, I think we've really found where the value is that we can provide. And I mentioned the digital inclusion, connecting unconnected areas. I think that's a bit different. I think we were a little bit different skewed on customer focus and engagements then. I think, as that's expanded, it then helps us. And again, I'll reference Indiana where I'm at today, just bringing connectivity through government funded programs to rural areas who don't have the same speeds that we do in urban areas. But then you can drive more functionality, such as smart agriculture solutions and, creating efficiencies or a better lifestyle for that farmer who doesn't need to go physically inspect 35 different plots of land to see if it rained last night. Whereas now, the touch of an app, everything's on an app these days, but the touch of an app can tell them what's happening. So I think that's changed a little bit. I think, that do good, we're adding value and doing good for society is really resonating with us at Veea because it's meaningful, it's impactful. Um, Conversely, the refined focus is also helping us in other areas as well. So some of the other use cases that I described, weren't necessarily in line of sight focus when I joined a couple of years ago, and they're there today. So it's been a transformation. Now you ask about 5 years from now, I think 5 years from now you're going to see a lot more AI involved in the ecosystem in general. I think this is where our Edge platform really adds a lot of value in being able to store content and AI applications and have actionable content with what our hardware can do at the edge, which will have meaningful, impactful results. Maybe not just at a farm, maybe it's that energy grid, that electrical grid that's covering that rural area. I think there's a lot of upside with where technology is headed and where Veea is positioned to capitalize on that.
Yep. Yep. That makes sense. Um, does an edge computing organization like Veea ever have to engage with governments? And how does that impact your messaging?
We do, and we do either directly or through partners. A lot of these rural programs that I've described, whether rural is Indonesia, rural is Mexico, rural is Indiana, there's a lot of government funding that's available to partners of Veea to help with cover and penetrate the opportunities and deploy. So I think the messaging might not necessarily be different per se. I think it, needs to tap into what we've done in the past, the data points of what we've done in the past, and how we can enable technology or enable solutions. Obviously, any government's looking to spend, but yet spend in a cost-effective manner. So I think our messaging and how we do what we can do in a cost-effective way is important. Nobody was going to go trench fiber through, the foothills and jungles of Indonesia,
Right.
but we were able to figure out a way to make it work so that connectivity can be brought into those areas. So, is there communication? Yes, there's constant communication. There's a bit of a prove it mentality, but then I think, again, proving it and solving these hard problems in ways that might not have been explored before, or solving these problems in cost-effective manners that help spread the money out further or spread the programs out in a more distributed manner is important.
Yep, that makes sense too. Um, yeah, these digital inclusion kind of narratives that often involve these governments that you're talking about are kind of always interesting to the to the media and the analysts kind of at large, right? So um, while working with different governments, I would imagine can be challenging from an initial kind of rollout point of view. I think once you can kind of establish that there's, you mentioned the prove it mentality, right? Once you've kind of gotten in there and proven it, those stories are really kind of evergreen, amazing resources for kind of future storytelling, right? Whether it's we're
Yeah.
talking to journalists or applying for industry awards, it's good fodder for, when you're speaking at a conference or something like that, right? Um, those are compelling kind of human interest, stories, right? That maybe don't necessarily come out when you're maybe dealing with a farm or something else. Another use case, for example.
Correct. Yeah. No, there's been a couple of events or awards that we've participated in or applied for, and it really gets down to starting with that messaging of, starting with what we've done in first Panama and then Indonesia, and it's doing good, doing well for others versus just selling more pieces of hardware. There's
Yep.
there's a there's an intrinsic value to what we're doing than just moving product,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is good. We're all in the business of profitability,
Right.
but yeah.
Right. Here's another audience question that is actually maybe we overlooked this kind of as we were having our conversation, but is remote connectivity a big issue here in the US as well? We've touched on a lot of international use cases, and we've touched on kind of rural, farms, but is remote connectivity an issue here as well?
It is. I think so. I don't have data stats to support the fact that it is, but that's why you see the government putting forth the tremendous amount of money and pushing it to the states for what's being called the next round is BEADs for the broadband equity deployments, because there's not the same level of connectivity in a rural county in Nebraska as there is if you were in Omaha, or rural central Illinois if you were in Chicago. So I think that there is a bit of an inequity there. And there's a lot of available dollars from the federal government and the state governments, whether it's for the individual user to tap into that for grants or to get stipends to, organizations that, are tapping into these BEAD dollars to then go build out and deploy networks to provide connectivity. There is an inequity between, not necessarily the haves and have-nots, but there's an inequity between certain areas and more urban or more rural, I don't say desolate, but more expansive areas where, the connectivity traditionally has not been available to the user.
Right. Yep, that makes sense. It's kind of it's interesting, right? Because yeah, where we sit and the world that we live in, right? We could never imagine a world where connectivity, especially in the States here, is a problem, right? But it really is.
Oh
And
yeah.
and it's good that you mentioned like how there's a real opportunity there. There's a business opportunity there, right? To meet that need that people don't often think about. So
Right.
um, very
Well,
interesting.
and yes, and in these rural areas, I mean, everybody deserves proper connectivity and
Mhm.
high-speed internet access, right? It's often said that connectivity is another utility, right? It's like electricity or gas or natural gas. I don't want to say it's a God-given right, but it certainly is something that everybody should have access to be able to connect effectively, connect multiple devices at speeds that, all of us on this bridge, I assume, take for granted.
Yep. Yep. Here's a question that kind of is getting at internal communications, which we haven't really talked about yet.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
so to keep things simple and effective when you're communicating, it seems like that you should have a playbook of some sort. Have you created anything like that? And if so, kind of what does it look like? What kind of content is on there? This person asks, it says keeping employees on the same page probably feels like a challenge that's kind of ongoing.
Well, I think from an internal Veea perspective, I think we all understand the task at hand. We all understand, the company goals. We all understand, what it is we're trying to achieve from a product perspective. Um, is it perfect? I don't think anything's ever perfect, but I think we do a really good job of communicating, the what and the why, and what that messaging is to customers, what that messaging is internally, what that message is, to external, peers and associations in terms of, what our guiding values are, what our core values are, and what our mission is.
Mhm.
So internal communications often gets overlooked. I think that might be the point of the question that was raised there. But I think it's as important as external, right? Not just from a knowledge perspective, sometimes from a morale, but just from here's what we're doing and why, and here's why this is important.
Yep. And from a PR perspective, internal comms is plays an important role in kind of how messaging comes out externally, right? So aligning everybody within an organization around some key themes, some key messages that we're going to make sure that we're always kind of harping on in every time we're speaking outwardly as well,
Yeah.
right? So again, I think of internal comms as kind of a foundational piece for, again, what kind of gets broadcast, outside the company, right? So, you know, when we were preparing,
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
it's not like it's not like a game of telephone, right? Where I tell you and you tell someone else about the time the 12th person is speaking. It's completely different than what we were trying to achieve. But yeah, I agree. I would absolutely agree. It's as important as anything else.
yeah, and to the question about a playbook, yes, we did create an internal comms playbook, especially for the DSPAC process and
Yes.
going public, right? So we wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page about what was allowed to be talked about and what was not allowed to be talked about, right? So that's always very important. And same like when we're prepping, uh, executives for interviews, right? Here's the things that we want to make sure we're hitting, like and
Yeah.
again, here's our 3 or 4 key kind of brand messages that we want to make sure we get across in every conversation.
No, completely agree. Yep.
There's lots of questions in here. So
All right,
these are
let's let's
all so
let's go
these are
for
all
them.
kind of future looking predictions oriented questions. So I'd love to kind of get your insight into what you think is kind of coming down the pipeline. But a couple of these questions kind of speak to that. So you mentioned that AI is coming to the fore in all facets of edge computing. Are you concerned at all that AI will make a brand's storytelling harder to remain genuine and authentic? And how do you think about the role of AI in communication specifically?
I think there's a lot of value in AI and in helping refine the message, helping keep it simple. Um, I thought I heard teasing out something about feeling threatened by AI in communication, which I mean, if we could go down the rat hole of disinformation and misinformation, and I suppose that's always something that we should think through in this day and age. But when I look at AI and I look at the value that Veea can bring to edge deployments in tandem with AI, it's completely different. It's all beneficial, and it's a way to help. Whether it's taking a look at digital twins to managing aging out infrastructure, like I mentioned before, electrical grids or water supplies. I think there's a lot of benefits in being able to have AI that's captured, processed, and acted upon at the edge is going to be beneficial. On the messaging, the communication side, I like to look at things in a sunny side up manner, and so I think it's only going to be used for positive messaging. But you know, fair point there.
Yep, yep. And I think, AI is not going to go away, obviously, right? It's going to be a
Yep.
part of our lives, from here on out. So, yeah, I think as AI becomes more present in our lives and in the way that it's used to disseminate information, right? I hope that people's level of being able to suss out what is authentic and what is not, right? I think will only improve over time as well.
Sure.
I think
Oh
right
yeah.
now it's probably for the layperson, it's probably pretty hard to figure out what's AI generated content and what's not, right? But I'd like
Yep.
to think that that's going to kind of improve, that that's a skill set we'll all learn kind of over time.
In some
Um,
ways, we'll be forced to have to learn, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, right? And I think AI, in our line of work, AI can be helpful in certain settings, but it always has to kind of go through that human kind of, BS detector lens, right? To make sure that, what AI is generating, actually makes sense and actually, accomplishes what we're trying to accomplish. So,
Well, it's in some ways my mind's gravitating to, the way home television or home internet service was 12, 15 plus years ago, where, if you wanted anything on demand, it was only through, your service provider. And
Mhm.
then there was a little bit of trepidation as to, well, why do I need a third-party app service like a Roku or a Napster if you go back even further? And now that's been adopted into everyday lifestyle, right? We don't just have a service provider. We might have Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime to help drive our entertainment needs. Similarly, there's multiple choices on your phone for music. So I think there's a little bit of a chasm that people's trust has to cross over. But when it does, I think AI will be readily adopted in many of the ways that we've discussed, in many ways we have no clue about quite yet.
Yep. Yep. And I know I keep harping on jargon, but AI these days, what does it learn based on what data does it learn off of? It learns, what's out there already, right? So if
Yep,
your company's messaging is already super jargon filled and you're trying to, use AI to create some other content down the line, right? It's going to pull from all this previously jargony filled, stuff, right? So it all goes back to like how clear and concise can your messaging be, right? And then if you have to use AI for something, down the line, right? Like then the data that you're feeding it to generate whatever it is you're doing, will be a little bit cleaner going down the line as well. So
absolutely. Just improvements over
yeah.
time. Makes absolute sense.
Yep. All right, two more questions from the audience, and if
Okay.
anybody else has anything else they want to add in, now's the time. Um, so this one is: are there any specific types of expertise that we should look for in an edge computing subject matter expert?
Well, I think, edge computing is a very broad topic in a very broad industry. So, subject matter expertise is, I would go back to, trust and credibility of the organization that you want to partner with,
Mhm.
because you're going to get a lot of disparate answers. You're going to get a lot of distinctly similar answers. I think where Veea sets itself apart from others is the ability to do processing at the edge, data collection at the edge, actionable information at the edge, in a very hardened, secure way, device-based security versus network or cloud-based security, which I think adds a lot of value to the deployment and the customers that we're going after. So if you're taking a look at, what you want to achieve at the edge, those are items that I would take a look at. Um, but I don't think that it's necessarily a subject matter expertise in a particular area. It's really, what's your use case, what's your need, and what's the, what are the channel partners, or more importantly, what are the companies that you're looking at to help solve that problem, more so than it is just, an expertise that A has over B. We could go for the next half hour and talk about the intrinsic value Veea has, but that's going to be completely different, and that would position us as a subject matter expert, right? But
Mhm. Yeah.
it just really depends upon what you, as whether that building owner, that fiber provider, that warehouse, what you're trying to solve, and more importantly, do your partners or do your service providers solve that for you?
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Um, So before we let you go, I wanted to ask what kinds of storylines or narratives do you think we'll kind of see come out in 2025 within Via's world? Do you think, we talked about kind of the role of AI in the future. Do you see any other kind of emerging trends, either from a communications perspective or a technological perspective, that you would expect to see?
So again, I think, in general, I think you're going to see a lot more from an AI perspective. I think it's here to stay. I think from a VIA perspective, you're going to see, a doubling down, or specific concentration on the successful deployments we've had, the successful partners and customers, and seeing that grow, both vertically with those particular engagements and horizontally with others. I think those are really the two areas. Again, like I said, AI is here to stay, and I think you're going to see it play more and more of a role at the edge, as we move forward.
That's great. Yep, that makes sense. Um, I'm laughing because I've seen this next question, and this is a great
Uh-oh.
place to end, I think.
Uh-oh.
Um,
Who's it
so,
from? No.
uh, well, it's from an anonymous attendee, but
Okay.
they ask a good question here. So, I'm curious to get your perspective with new teams like Oregon joining the Big Ten this year.
Yeah.
Do you think Purdue football will ever have a winning season again?
Wow, that's very weighted and loaded and unfair. I think the short answer will be yes.
There you go. Good.
You said
Great.
again, you didn't put it in a time bound, in the next 5 or 10 or 15 years. I'd like to believe that with the hiring of our new coach this week, with a little bit more adoption to nil, from a Purdue perspective, I think, retaining some of the core, I think we will be back.
Of course. There's always sunnier days ahead, right?
Yes.
So,
And I will say, James, as bizarre as it is to say, we have, our the Big Ten champion is the undefeated Oregon Ducks. I do hope that you run the table, although I think if you win, or I think your first game would be against Ohio State, so that'll be interesting.
yeah,
Not to
yeah.
slight the Tennessee Volunteers, but we can go off on a tangent on the college football playoff for the next hour, right?
Yep, yep. I know. My prediction for 2025 is that Oregon's going to finally get it done this year. I hope we can get it done. This is one of the best teams we've had since I've been a fan. So
Um,
we'll see. Well, anyway, Tom, thank you so much for the time today. This was super informative. We just had another comment join or jump in the Q&A. I'm a big fan of Veea already, but I know a lot more today than I did before the call. Much appreciated. So,
Well, I'm glad I can help one person learn a little bit more today, right? One step. I believe here at Purdue, it's like one giant footprint at a time, right? One giant
yep,
step at a time, one leap at a time, maybe. So there you go. We'll leave it at that. Thank you for the opportunity. It was fun talking to you. Please remember, Purdue's a basketball school first, not a football school, but we'll leave it at
that's
that.
right. That's right. That's right. And thank you to our audience for attending. We really appreciate your time. If you
Likewise.
have any
Thank you all.
other questions that you think of after the fact, you can always email us at Sterling. But really appreciate everybody's time. And thanks again, Tom.
Thank you, James. Have a great rest of your week. And if we don't speak, have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks all.